Well, thanks for joining us on The Real Story. I'm Jen Bernstein. I hope you all are well and healthy at home. We have another special edition of The Real Story. We're coming to you virtually, and I want to welcome right now Congressman Jim Himes, who is also Skyping with us. Congressman, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having me.
All right, so tell me, first of all, what it looks like to be a congressman right now in this time period. Normally, you're meeting with constituents or you're in Washington. How is your time filled, and how are you and your family holding up?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. We're doing great. Thank God we are all here together and observing, of course, all the rules about not going out unless it's absolutely necessary. But yeah, good question. This is a very different way of being a congressman than I've ever experienced. It is everything from being on the phone with Speaker Pelosi to talk about what more needs to be done to follow up on the CARES Act to there's a guy down the street with a box of masks in his garage, and what can we do to make sure those get used, and everything in between. Of course, a big part of this is having passed the $2 trillion CARES Act, it's making sure that everybody, and there are so many people out there who are suffering, who are losing their jobs, that people really understand how they can get aid, and of course making sure that that aid actually gets delivered, whether it's to individuals or to small businesses or to churches, what have you. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, let's talk about that stimulus package here. When can people expect those checks? We had heard, within 3 weeks when it was first passed last month. Governor Lamont had heard April 17th. Now we're hearing it may be sooner. When can money hit people's bank accounts?
Yeah, so for the $1,200 check or payment that you're referring to, they will start going out very, very soon. Now, here's the critical thing, and people need to understand this, because if the IRS has people's information, and of course they're going to key this off of the last tax return you filed, either 2019 or 2018, and if that filing had direct deposit information in it, you may see an electronic transfer to your account, if you qualify, of course, as soon as in the next couple of days. I'm told by the Treasury Secretary that electronic transfers of people who qualify should be in the next couple of days. For people who don't file tax returns but who are getting some form of Social Security, either disability or regular Social Security, they should also see electronic transfers. Where it gets a little tricky is if somebody has never filed a tax return or hasn't filed a tax return recently, the checks that need to get mailed out, those checks will get mailed out at the rate of 5 million every single week. That's apparently the maximum capacity they can mail out, and that will go on for several weeks. So it's really in the interest of people who are out there who want to get that money sooner rather than later to make sure that the IRS has their information so that it can be electronically transferred. For those people who want to give that information, of course.
So if you are worried that the IRS doesn't have that exact information, or you hadn't filed before, you're advising them to contact the IRS at this point?
Well, even easier than that, Jen. I'm told by the Treasury that next week, as early as Monday, but these things, everybody is sort of working on all these brand new programs, but that next week there will be a portal opened up on the Treasury site or on the IRS website, and the portal will be called Where Is My Rebate? And the Where Is My Rebate portal will allow people to give the information that the IRS needs to get them that money. So we'll be publicizing as soon as that portal is open. But that, if you didn't file a tax return in 2018 or 2019, going to that portal, Where Is My Rebate, will allow you to give the information, your banking information and your identity information, and then it will allow you to track where we are in the process of the Treasury getting you that $1,200.
You voted for the last 3 stimulus bills, which were bipartisan, and we keep hearing that a 4th aid package of some sort is going to come to fruition. What are you hearing from Nancy Pelosi?
Well, this is obviously a joint effort, and we know a couple of things. We know, for example, that the $350 billion that was appropriated for the small business lending programs and forgivable loan programs, that we're probably a third of the way in sort of 4 or 5 days of operations, a third of the way in to to obligating that $350 billion. So we know already that that amount is going to need to be increased. And in fact, Mitch McConnell and President Trump have asked for more money. Nancy Pelosi, you asked about Speaker Pelosi. She has said, that's fine, we need that money, but we also need more money for our states. You know, our states are really the ones who are coordinating the building of hospitals, who are providing the Medicaid. Our states need money, and she's asking for $150 billion directly to the states. And this means that states don't need to raise people's income taxes to get made whole on the coronavirus. And then, of course, she's also saying that our hospitals and our community health centers, which are just overrun right now, also need some money. So what you're going to see in the next couple of days is that political dance and that negotiation occur. I'm pretty confident, though, that at some point next week we will have the outlines of the fourth package, because it's pretty clear that there were some holes in the big one, in the CARES Act, which, you know, was all about speed, right? That was about getting money to people now. And so now we're in the process of figuring out what else needs to get done.
Yeah, I know Governor Lamont said that with this last stimulus package, it didn't necessarily address the problem of loss of state revenue, and he's encouraging towns and cities to document their COVID-19 losses. Is that what you're referring to when Nancy Pelosi's talking about specifically states needing more money?
That's exactly right, Jen. So if you think of, if you think of what the states are doing right now, you know, every state employee at the Department of Labor is working 24/7 to get the unemployment insurance system in the kind of shape it needs to be for the unprecedented demand that it's experiencing. State troopers, first responders, schools that are working overtime to deliver free breakfasts and free lunches to those kids who need it. The states are really bearing enormous amounts of expenses, as are the municipalities. Our cities and towns, of course, you know, are overwhelmed in their health centers with their first responders, and they too are going to need some assistance. So that's absolutely right. The governor is right in saying that every town and every city, every hospital should document the expenses associated with the COVID virus, because either through FEMA or through other mechanisms, those expenses will be ultimately reimbursed. Sorry, I lost my earpiece there.
Makes sense. See, it's just the technological challenges we're all facing right now.
There we go. I'm hearing you once again, though.
Okay, good. In terms of the stimulus bill or future stimulus bills, right? Because we might have this fourth one, but we could have more after that, depending on how long this goes, depending if we see these kind of rolling shutdowns into the fall at some point, which we don't know, but is a possibility. Do you think there could be more stimulus money for individual people and businesses moving forward? I know you had talked about how the business loans may increase because we've already gone through a lot of it, but what about those individual checks to people?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the negotiation right now centers on what we were talking about on the funds that are available to small businesses, which of course are about people, right? When money goes to small businesses, it goes to pay employees, right? To keep those employees employed so that they're not laid off and fired. So yeah, we call it small business forgivable loans, but at the end of the day, that money finds its way into the hands of people in order to keep them employed. But the other buckets of money that are being talked about right now are state and municipal funding and healthcare funding. You ask about individuals. The answer is yes. Clearly, if we get signals in the next couple of weeks that this is an economic recession that is likely to last more than, and I'm just sort of finger to the wind on these numbers, but if this recession is likely to last longer than a month or two, which I think is probable, there will be a need for additional direct aid to individuals. It's not being talked about right now because, again, we haven't even gotten out the $1,200 checks yet. But my guess is that if this thing drags on beyond a month or two, we are going to need to appropriate money for more direct aid to individuals.
One of the biggest concerns expressed by governors across the state, and especially Governor Lamont, Governor Andrew Cuomo, is the states trying to get PPEs. They're all, bidding against each other to get ventilators. I know that New York, Connecticut, kind of the tri-state region up here has tried to pair together so that they're not competing, but it's driving up the price. These states are dealing with China, which they might not be normally in their wheelhouse. A lot of them think that the federal government might be more equipped to do that. What's the discussion in Washington about that right now?
Yeah, it's been a frustrating one, Jen. I turn on the TV and watch the coronavirus task force led by Vice President Pence assure me that 3M and other manufacturers are working overtime, that there are millions of masks in the pipeline, and that everybody should get the PPE that they need. But that's just not what we're seeing on the ground here, particularly in southwestern Connecticut, where we've been at the epicenter of Connecticut's coronavirus outbreak. Well, that's just not what we're seeing. Fortunately, we haven't reached a situation yet where it's truly critical, where something has been simply gone and it has put people at risk. But every day there's a new organization down here. I was talking to one of our local healthcare centers that was telling me that they've got a one-day supply of PPE. A couple of days ago, it was Stanford Hospital that was running really short of small N95 masks. And so, we're just not getting the kind of support that we need out of the national stockpile. Now, we are getting some. And of course, individual philanthropists and individual businesses and contractors are really pitching in. People are finding that they can, individually purchase some of this stuff. Contractors and restaurants and others are finding that they've actually got inventories of this stuff and they're contributing it to local hospitals and health centers. But we're still not at a point where we have a reliable flow. And that's why I spend an awful lot of time agitating with FEMA, agitating with the Vice President's office, saying, hey, we've still got a real problem here and we need your help.
We have to address the fact, obviously, that you represent Fairfield County and you are right on the edge of the hot zone, New York City. And Fairfield County's seen the largest number of coronavirus cases here in our state. Tell me, is there something in particular? I know there's probably a lot that keeps you up at night, but what's your biggest concern in the area you represent and where you live?
Well, obviously, the biggest concern is what we've been talking about. We have seen roughly half the fatalities in Connecticut, right here in southwestern Connecticut in Fairfield County. And, we're not on the edge of the New York situation. I spend an awful lot of my time on the phone with FEMA and with the Vice President's office and with HHS, telling them you can't think of Connecticut, and particularly southwestern Connecticut, as separate from New York. We are contiguous, and New Rochelle, of course, had its own massive outbreak. In New Rochelle, you can practically throw a rock from the Connecticut border and hit New Rochelle. So I spent an awful lot of time explaining that, this came to us right up 95, right up the rail lines, and we've got a situation that is as serious as New York's situation. And of course, we're not unique. We're seeing over these last couple of days, you can almost trace it along 95 and 91. We're seeing Hartford and New Haven experience very high levels of new cases and sadly some fatalities. So again, it may be most intense here in Fairfield County, but my colleagues in mayor's offices and first selectman's offices, the governor, my colleagues in the rest of the state, we are just buttoned down trying to make sure that our hospitals and our healthcare facilities and our first responders have the equipment that they need so that they can stay safe to try to keep other people safe. So yeah, we may be in the epicenter down here, but it is, it is rolling through.
Yeah, COVID-19 doesn't know state boundaries, that's for sure. Congressman Jim Himes, I really appreciate you taking the time for this in-depth discussion, and you're always welcome on the program. Please be safe and be healthy.
Thank you, Jen.
All right, we have more to come today on The Real Story. Ahead, Connecticut's Secretary of the State, Denise Merrill, is going to join me. She's going to talk about early voting. She had pushed for that originally, but now she's interested in mail-in voting because of the coronavirus. Plus, we're going to talk about the state's primary that's been pushed off. The Real Story will continue ahead.